So I get a lot of questions about Pavlov mapmaking, and I want to make this video to kind of give an overview of some of the common mistakes people make and things you can avoid and fix. This is going to be specific for Pavlov VR and specific to SND, search and destroy maps. It's best to always make a map for search and destroy because if you have an S&D map, you can play any other game mode on it. But if you have a map that's designed around, say, deathmatch, you're not going to be able to play search and destroy on it and have a good time. So if you're starting out making a map, always design it around search and destroy. The plan is to turn this into a video series, and we're going to go through the steps start to finish from absolutely nothing to a finished, completed, polished map. This video, we're going to be talking about the level design. That's kind of the guiding factor on we want a bomb spot here, and we want a path this way, and where, like a blueprint on where everything is supposed to be. And this will be done before you even open up the editor. Get out a pen and paper, or in the case of this video, we're going to break out MS Paint and start getting an idea of what our map is going to be before we get into Unreal Engine. Once we have the level design, we're going to go to the blockout, not using any fancy props or geometry or market assets, just like cubes, rectangles, maybe some spheres, and just get an idea of scale, where cover's going to be, hallways, connections, things like that. And then get feedback and improve that layout until it is competitively viable for search and destroy. And then once we have the layout locked in, that's when you do the visual pass, the art pass, do lightings, and then finally optimization to make it actually playable and performance ready. There's a lot of different hardware for different headsets, and there's a lot of performance requirements, and you want to make it as nice looking, but also you got to make it playable. Otherwise, people aren't going to have a good time at 40 FPS in VR. So the goal is to end up with something like this. This is what a level design looks like. You have what's pretty industry standard for video games, especially like the search and destroy type game modes, is you have what's called a 3-lane. You have defenders at one side, attackers at the other, 2 objectives on either side, and then there's 3 different paths that the players can follow that gives them options on how they want to complete the objective on the map. You can break this out, and we're going to come up with all the different connections and layouts and everything. If you want additional resources besides this video, there is a very good guide on the world of level design. I'll have this linked in the description, and they go through a lot of the same points that I'm going to cover here. So we're going to take a look at some maps that are already done first and get an idea of the sort of things that make them good, make them bad, and try and get some inspiration for what we want our map to be. The obvious place to look is Counter-Strike. For a game like Pavlov, there's a lot of similarities between Counter-Strike and Pavlov VR. You could also look at Call of Duty, Valorant. A lot of the first-person shooter games have some sort of S&D game mode that has a lot of the same fundamental aspects to it. Now, there are some key differences going between something like Counter-Strike that's on Pancake and something like Pavlov that's in VR. Notably, you're in VR. So if you want to throw a smoke from A to B, you can't line up off of a window and throw it into sight and have it land consistently in the same spot over and over again. So you have to design your map knowing that when somebody throws a smoke in VR, they might be able to get the general area, but you have to make it a lot more accommodating so people can't land it exactly in the center of a pathway. You can also throw utility significantly farther. In Pavlov, you can lob grenades from here all the way to Ticket. There's an acceleration that you get, and you can really throw utility and knives across the map. You got to be careful about at spawn. You don't want somebody to just leave spawn and be able to throw a knife all the way down onto the other team that's spawning. That's why this version of Mirage has this big overhang here, so you can't just chuck knives back and forth at each other from spawn. You have to have either an overhang like what's done here, or some sort of tall blockage. You can use invisible volumes to block cross-map knives and grenades and utility. However, I tend to try and avoid invisible walls as much as possible, because it can be kind of frustrating if you're trying to throw utility from here to here and it just hits something invisible that you didn't even know was there and you just wasted your utility. In addition to that, Pavlov is in VR, so you can move your head around. It's not just head height standing or crouched at a specific height. You can move your head anywhere in between, so you can get some weird like looking between cracks and moving your head up and down. So you got to be very mindful of your geometry, that you're not leaving head peaks where I can't really see the person behind the box, but there's a crack right here that they can bend down and shoot through. When you design cover for Pavlov, it has to be very solid, very filled. You can't have any sort of like cracks between the box or anything like that. In addition, ramps and elevation movement is a lot different in Pavlov. The time it takes to go from here to here is the same time it would take to run to here in Pavlov. Going up a ramp adds no time or slowdown for Pavlov. You just zip right up, and it's like a 70-degree angle that players can climb. If you did want to do something like a ladder, Pavlov does support this, but ladders are typically finicky, and I would strongly recommend not using ladders, because fighting while one player's on a ladder and another player's standing, that back and forth results in rather unfun gameplay, because it's difficult to maintain a position on the ladder. If you're playing in VR, you kind of have to fidget with the joystick or the position on the ladder to try and keep your height. You can't just take your finger off of WASD and stay at a ladder height like a pancake game. Ladders can be difficult to implement correctly. In addition, bomb spots. Pavlov, you have very specific locations that you identify where a bomb is going to be placed. You have A or B, and you can have multiple different positions. Here's an A site, and you can see there's a half dozen or so different locations that you can plant the bomb. In Counter-Strike, it's more of a box, and you can just plant the bomb anywhere in the box. So the orientation that these are facing, you need to keep that in mind, so you plan where people can watch the bomb and see the bomb from when you're designing the map. So you have a general idea of where you want the site you want to be, but then you have to have a more specific idea of, all right, if I put the bomb here, they're going to have to run down, turn around, and plant it this way. And when they defuse, they're going to be blocked off from this area and all of the different geometry that's specific to whatever map you make. Bomb spot placement is critically important. I think there's other stuff, but we'll kind of go through that as we go along. Starting with your layout, you have your basic 3-lane The reason you would want to lay out something like this is because you need to give CTs time to get to the sites before the attackers can. If the attackers could get to, say, B site before or about the same time as the defenders, then it's just a race, and that's not fun gameplay. And your map should never be designed around who can buy guns at spawn immediately and then beeline straight to the site to get an advantage. So let's take a look at some other common mistakes that I see in maps. Number one would probably be complexity. It's very easy to go crazy drawing all sorts of paths and making all sorts of cool connectors, but a lot of times this just leads to a maze-like situation where players are confused, they don't know where to go. It could lead to dead ends and things like that. So if we take a look at this example from Counter-Strike, you can see there are so many connections and they all go to the same place. Like, why would somebody go left as opposed to right here? It just leads you to the same location. This is needless complexity that just confuses players. And look here, you could either go left or right, but this also leads to the same place. This whole area should just be one path coming up to here. The simplification of maps early on is probably one of the best things you can do. It's very easy to just add a new path from A to B later on, but you don't want to overwhelm people and give people a maze like this, because it's confusing and it leads to way too many options. Players are going to be creative about how they get to either bomb site with the standard 3-lane. That provides plenty of options and variability to keep the gameplay engaging. Another thing that is kind of specific to Pavlov is verticality. Here is the map Station, which is one of the base maps in Pavlov. You can see there's 3 levels to this map. Now, the audio in Pavlov doesn't transition very well vertically, so if somebody is running from here to here in the middle, you can't tell if they're like a floor above you or a floor below you. If they're just running across the bottom of the map and you're here, you have absolutely no idea if they're running on the top floor or bottom floor. It's very good to avoid verticality, and any map you make should try and stick to one level. There can be instances where you go up onto a raised platform or something and shoot down onto a site, like Mirage has this kind of overhang. But notice you're not like getting up into the second story of any of these buildings. It's all kind of on the same plane. There is a little bit of verticality in mid or underpass, but you're not having engagements from here up to the top of stairs here. Like, these sorts of fights don't translate well to VR because you have tracking issues when you aim your controllers up. It just provides unfun gameplay based on the hardware that people use. Another thing to avoid is these railings. These are a nightmare for inconsistency. If I'm down here shooting at the cameraman, the bullets could hit all these railings, but maybe not if it goes through here, or maybe yes if it goes through here. And that provides inconsistency, which is something that you want to desperately avoid with a map. A good search and destroy map should not revolve around R&D or RNG. Also, these types of stairs are a disaster because you can see through them and shoot through them. This provides visibility. I could see a player down there and they could see me up here, but if we try and shoot at each other, half our bullets are going to be blocked by these metal stairs. This just provides immensely unfun gameplay and is a core thing to avoid. Here's another map. Somebody made a glass room, and you can go into the room, but you can't shoot through the glass. So this provides a really awkward gameplay mechanic where you can see somebody but can't shoot them. Whenever you have visibility on a map, you should be able to have an engagement. You can't design a map around like waving at each other through glass. That just won't provide competitively viable gameplay. Another thing to look at are hidey holes. Here's a map. You have a couple stairs going up into a site, but if you look down under here, look at all these different corners that people can hide and sneak into. There's no gameplay reason why I should be able to hide in a dark little corner under the stairs here. These sorts of complex geometry mistakes are pretty common that people make, and it leads to gameplay where you have to check behind this box, you have to check behind this doorway, you have to check behind this doorway, you have to check in this window, you have to check in this window, this doorway, back here behind this pillar, behind this generator here, behind this generator here, under the stairs, this side of the doorway, that side of the doorway. There are so many different options that an enemy player could be when you walk into this room. It is a level of complexity that is far too high. Another thing to avoid is little slits in geometry. Here we have a map that has a very nice looking fence, but if you're standing right in front of this fence, you can see out pretty well. But if you're over here and somebody's behind the fence, you can't really see him. So that leads to a situation where the guy behind the fence has a significant advantage that can see the attackers approaching this way, but the attackers can't see the defender. And that leads to that asymmetrical visibility that you desperately want to avoid when designing a map. Another common mistake I see is around the connectors. If you have, like you zoom in on one of the connectors to the bomb sites here, oftentimes it's good to break up like a long sight line. You don't necessarily want to have a really long engagement, so you can zigzag your connector and try and avoid that, but people do this. And it leads to the situation where if I'm standing here, I can see through the crack, and it leads to reduced sightline, sure, but very thin sightline that's hard to fight back and forth between. This isn't very good level design. Something like this is a lot better, where you extend the connection apart from each other, so that if somebody's here, there's no way for them to see the person that's over here. And it provides an actual separation in the path. This is much less of a separation. Now let's actually get into the level design of the map we're going to be making in this video series. I'm going to be drawing from a couple of different sources of inspiration. The first of which is a map called Seaside. This has an interesting connector dynamic that I like, where it's one kind of entrance, but this area entering is at a raised elevation compared to here, and you can simply walk off of this area and fall into this like pit area. And I like the way that this plays, and I like the way that it looks, and I also like the way that this bomb site plays. This is kind of an elevated area above the actual plant site. And so in this map, I'm going to try to combine these two elements into one site, where this sort of raised area above the bomb site will be on this sort of connector, where the raised area would be here above a lower bomb site. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that. So that's going to be our B. This is a map from a YouTuber, War Owl, designed for Counter-Strike, and I like his mid design where there's one entrance and an elevated path going to the right, and kind of an interesting dynamic looking through the connector to the other. The defenders have a one-way drop that they can fall down to defend this mid, and there is a non-pen sort of geometry blocking this area of the map that can provide a sight line with cover into the B connector, or if you're here, you can kind of use this to defend against the attackers. So I'm going to try and incorporate this style of mid design into the map. The third source of inspiration I'm going to draw from is Drunk for Josh, a map submitted for an Arctic VR mapmaking event for Pavlov. I liked their B site layout. It was kind of interesting where you had kind of a pathway going into a hexagonal site, but there was another path that kind of made a circle around the site, and there were some windows and geometry. I'm going to simplify this a little bit, but I like the idea of having like a centralized pillar almost to destroy, and a like horseshoe loop around the site that's almost like a thin hallway. This I thought was interesting. I do worry a little bit about the complexity, but we'll try it and see how it goes. And for spawns, let's do CT and T. Now, can't just have the CTs going straight into mid. I want to avoid a really long sight line all the way into their spawn. So some sort of spawn room that has a path, maybe stairs going up or a ramp onto the kind of mid section. And I think this map even has something like that. Yeah, here's the CT spawn, and there's a little wiggle around getting up into, I guess this would be a heaven area. And they have a connector directly going into B. I'm not sure if I want to connect those two. It might be better to just have a simpler one connection. So for B, there are two entrances into the site for attackers and one for defense. I may need to add a second at some point, either there or maybe something like this, but I think that's good enough for testing. From T-Spawn, going back to Mirage, T-Spawn kind of gives you three options to go, left, right, or center, but the center splits. So then there's the main mid-center and then a connection over. I think I'm going to do this, but flipped for, in my case, A. You know, it doesn't make sense to have this here because you would see all the way from side into the main area. This is going to have to get moved over and some sort of connection here, and then maybe here. See, this is turning into like a literal maze. See, I don't like this. I think I'm just gonna have to scrap this bomb site location. We have CT, T side, mid, B. I gotta figure out something from A. Let's look at some examples. All right, so I have an idea of what I want to do now. This is the map Gravity, and I like the way that A site plays. It's a relatively small site space-wise, but there's two entrances, one from mid, one from here, and then CT has this kind of, it meets at a T almost, and and then attackers can come from either direction. I like the way this works. I'm not so sure I like this square loop at the back, and I wouldn't incorporate this, but some sort of layout like this that doesn't have maybe this L. This is what I'm going to try and implement. Well, this is what I came up with. This is the layout that I'm going to take to the next step of map development, which is blockout. Now is where we're actually going to open up Unreal and start dropping cubes and try and visualize what this sort of layout would look like in VR. Kind of an overview. Sanity check, CTs can get to the sites before Ts. We don't have any crazy long sight lines. We don't have a maze of options. There's 3 lanes, A, B, and middle. We are avoiding ladders. We have a couple of ramps and a couple of drop downs, the height of which the height gradients are going to be here will determine their viability. I think that this is good enough to move forward. Alright, so here is the finished blockout. Let's go on a quick tour. Starting at T-spawn, you have a path to B. This path splits. To the left, we kind of have the flanking horseshoe pathway, and to the right, we have a direct route to B. At B site, we have a pillar with bomb spots around it, and a path back to CT. CTs can go direct into mid. There is a ramp up, and this sort of blocking volume here should prevent them from using the ramp as a head glitch and seeing anywhere that they shouldn't. So in order to peek from mid, they'll have to come up to the left or right. Ts can approach mid from 2 paths, either a direct route that exposes them to the connector or mid, or a slower route over to A that they can loop around here and get angles up into the connector. I switched A and B from the design. This is now B and this is now A. Going to A, we have a zigzag connector, and instead of doing like the seaside 2-lane all the way, at the back here there's a drop, so you can come out and then drop down, and then you have the elevated position and the lower position into sight. Not sure how these elevations are going to change. I might need to raise this a bit. I'm thinking about moving this drop down back. Lots of different ideas, but this is how we're going to test it. On actual A site, little box cover, and that's about it. Here's kind of a top-down view. The next step is the hardest. That's to actually get feedback from real human players on your map. It's somewhat difficult to get somebody to play on a map like this because there are so many options that are finished. Like, who wants to play on this ugly green cube vomit when you have a fancy Mirage or fancy Dust 2 or something that you could play on? But thankfully, there is a community of competitive Pavlov players. This is a shack map, so we're going to be using the PCL Discord, and they have something called pickups, which is somewhat more casual, and hopefully get some competitive players to play this in pickups there and provide feedback. If you want to get feedback on a map that you made, go in knowing that most of the feedback you get will be completely unhelpful, and it'll be like pulling teeth a lot of the times because it's hard to articulate what makes a map good or bad, and not everybody has the words to describe why they don't like a site. They'll just say like, B site's bad, or this map sucks, or it's ugly, or whatever, and they won't be able to give constructive criticism. And so finding a community like PCL for Quest or VRML for PCVR, there you get some more people that are enthusiastic about search and destroy for Pavlov, and a lot of map makers participate in those discords, and you have a lot better chance getting quality feedback joining one of those discords than just loading this up in a public lobby and asking random noobs if they enjoy playing on the map. The links for both of those discords will be in the description. You can also try posting in the general Pavlov Discord. There's a category for search and destroy, or one of the workshop channels. People might be able to give you feedback there as well. That's it for this video. The next video, hopefully we will have some feedback and we'll make some design changes and improve the blockout and go from there.